Well, hi everyone. We're back with another in our series, Fund Manager Interviews. We're delighted to have Matthew Cushen from Worth Capital today. Matthew and Worth Capital were the inaugural winners of our Diversity Champions at our recent ESA Awards back in 2020 last year. So congratulations to them, first of all. And we're going to find out a little bit more about that today. And Matthew's going to kind of run us through a bit of removing bias in early stage investing. So really digging deep into early stage investing and going a little bit further than perhaps we normally do, which is very much the idea of these videos, which is perfect. So Matthew, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself and let us know what you're going to be talking about?
Yeah, hello Mark, hello viewers. Thanks for the invite. So I'm founding partner of Worth Capital. We've been around for 5 years or so, but I've been an angel investor for about 15 years. I've got a background as a retailer as my profession. I used to be in big corporate retail land, but then I'm also an innovation consultant and have been so for about 10 years. And I still help businesses like IKEA and AB InBev and the restaurant group and people like that.
Fantastic.
So you thought it would be useful to talk about. Well, I think this is the kind of interesting one that people talk about diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And then I think I came back to you and said, actually, let's talk about removing bias in investing, which is kind of like a bit of a deliberate thing. That actually, for me, it's with an investor's hat on, it's the key thing to do is remove bias. With a societal hat on, the happy consequence of that is that we should end up with a better range of diversity and inclusion in the investments that we make. So, yep. But I think it is kind of two different things. One's an outcome and one's a cause.
So you mean, so I honestly, I'll be honest with you, I find this a minefield, trying to be diverse, trying to be inclusive. I'm quite the opposite of that. I'm not at all, I don't think. But so what's your definition? Let's start with the basics. What's your definition of diversity?
So for us, it's about challenging ourselves whether the cash that we're investing is reaching a population that is reasonably representative of the society around us. So, and I guess that gets us to the first point, which is, unfortunately, as a industry, we've got a really crappy record of doing that. So when you look at the numbers, depending on what you read, but they're all pretty similar, the level of funding going to businesses with female founders is single-digit percentage.
Yeah. UK BAA have done a lot of work on that, haven't they? Trying to find out what percentage of female founders get funding from VCs. So.
And it kind of, there's two different definitions. One is fully female founded, which can be as low as 1% when you look at the numbers. And then sometimes you see a definition which is including a female founder. And then generally, depending on what report you're reading, it's up around sort of like 9-10% of funding. But regardless of the definition, regardless of the number, it's still a rubbish number.
yeah, I see what you mean. Well, I'll go back the other way then. If I kind of play devil's advocate here, because I find that easier. I'm an investor. I just want to invest in a great company. I want to get a great return. I want to get all the money, etc., get my tax relief from the eyes. Do I really care whether the company is diverse, inclusive? Should I care? That's probably a better question.
Well, that goes back to the first point about, well, why did we call this about removing bias in investing? Because I don't think as an investor, I care about diversity and inclusion. I do as a responsible member of society. Yep. As an investor, I don't care about that. But I do care about whether my investment manager is able to remove their innate biases and therefore to see the world in a way that best drives return on investment rather than just what they happen to be close to or understand or subconsciously attracted to. So that's why I think removing bias is the key thing.
Okay, and how do you do that in the company? Because you run a company, you're like me, male, stale and pale. Your other founder, if I remember correctly, is also male, stale and pale.
Equally male, more stale, more pale. And look, and by the way, I live in central London. He lives just outside in Surrey. We are the stereotypical investors. So first stage is to recognise that.
Yeah,
and that's the simple bit. But it is kind of amazing. I mentioned earlier on, I'm an innovation consultant, and that's where a lot of our thinking on this has come from. So I help big businesses to create new products, new brands, new experiences, new services, new strategies, and new capability. So I work with leadership teams of big businesses, and it's amazing how unaware they are of their biases, and they kind of fall into their rivers of thinking.
Yeah.
So the first thing is that we recognized it, and then we deliberately designed some stuff to help us to remove it. So first up is the people that we have in the team around us. So it's not just us that look at businesses. Hayley is the most important person in our business, and she's younger and she's female. We have a particular way of attracting deal flow, which is our competition, which I'll come back to. But that gives us a very rigorous process, and part of that is we have a kind of a monthly entry, and so every month we have guest judges. We try to make sure that they come from diverse backgrounds, so that they kind of help challenge our thinking, both generally and then also on individual businesses. We publish our rationale for our criteria for investing. We have a very rigorous set pattern that we go through, which disciplines us and makes sure that we're not being kind of lazy and going into our subconscious, but we're being rational and explicit about our judgments. We feed back to those businesses that we consider closely, so about 25 a month. We feed back to them as to what we liked and disliked, so it kind of holds us to account. So we're kind of transparent as to why we haven't invested.
Yep.
And then the other thing is, so that's the kind of distillation, if you like, but then the other thing is where you get your deal flow from.
Okay.
So yeah, I think a lot of the problem is within the fund management industry. It's often about networks. All through the ages, there's been those with capital have sat back, arrogantly and expected those that need capital to come and ask for it.
Yeah.
And generally, that's going to be who you know, or sort of part of your network or whatever. And we have a competition which we designed to make sure was kind of easy to enter. It's very hard to win, but it's easy to enter. It's promoted by smallbusiness.co.uk and growthbusiness.co.uk, so it goes kind of across the country. It's engaging. It's only a 2-minute video or a 2-page summary to enter, but then it goes through 3 or 4 stages to get to the end, which is when we're really interrogating the businesses. And we found that just gives us a much more inclusive, more representative load of entries, and that's the first stage to them being able to end making more diverse and inclusive investments.
Okay, so that means rather than your universe kind of being like that, you're expanding your universe of thinking, number one, but also the companies that you're getting approached by and able to go to. Okay.
And then the other thing beyond that is then kind of what we invest in, because that kind of is influenced a little bit as well, because if we were sitting here if we were a deep tech business, then we'd probably find it harder to invest in women, because actually there's right through education and STEM subjects, etc., and then therefore into the industry and with the expertise is predominantly blokes. Now, so that would make it very difficult for an investor. We search for businesses that are either consumer or B2B, but that have the capability to create habitual consumption and therefore a loved brand. And a lot of that is about empathy and insight into markets. And it's great to have a diversity of entrepreneur, because then they're the ones that have the empathy with a number of different markets. I happen to live in central Shoreditch, but we don't, we wouldn't invest in businesses rarely invest in a business that's been born in Shoreditch, because often what you get is something that's fit for within the North and South Circular, but isn't representative of mainstream UK. And there are ethnic markets that are huge, and interesting, and you're more likely to get the insight of that from an entrepreneur in that market.
Okay, so I understand obviously the competition process and how that works and how you get in a kind of wider field of companies to invest in. When you got down to the point where you've got, I know you picked 5, 6, 7 that have come through that process, you think, yeah, I've got some great companies here, but now we can only invest in, let's say, 2 or 3. If you got, and again, this is me playing devil's advocate, if you've got one great company here with a whole male team and one great company here with a whole female team, do you just say, let's pick the female one because they're females, i.e. a bit of positive discrimination?
No, we are completely anti-positive discrimination, and I mean it's not our role. Our role is to make a great return on investment for investors, and we remove bias because we believe that's the best way to make a better return on investment. It happens, the unintended but fortunate consequence of that is we end up with a better record on diversity and inclusion than others in the industry, but there's no positive discrimination there at all.
And does the portfolio bear that out in terms of that actually does take place, that you get higher returns because you are investing across different?
Unfortunately, we're too early for our portfolio to be able to make that correlation, and also we're relatively small. Our AUM is only 5 million, so we're 20 investments. We've had a handful of them have failed, but there's not enough to correlate the failures and the successes yet. I mean, we've got some great returns on paper, but that's not enough to look at. There are studies, though, not in the seed space, I hasten to add, but there are studies to show that a more diverse and inclusive investing approach does help returns. But it just makes sense. I mean, look, I wrote this the other day, I'm not sure the analogy works that well, but if you were sitting in a meeting with an investment manager and they stood up and they kind of like left a trail of cash behind them, and as they were showing you to the door, you would think that either they were arrogant or they were slapdash, or they were just not kind of or they were a bit careless or whatever. And that's what's happening if you're not analyzing your potential, in fact, if you're not attracting a wide range of investments and you're not analyzing them in a bias-free way, you're leaving money on the table.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, I see the point. And what have you been proud of achieving over the last few years? I guess, as you say, some of those companies are hopefully coming towards an exit. Perhaps it would be a good idea to give a couple of ideas of the companies that you have invested into.
Yeah, so we've got a company at the moment which is a female and a male founder, and it's a bedding company, and it's kind of an interesting one because bedding is one of those markets where actually as a male middle-aged guy, I probably haven't got huge empathy with that market. Now, actually, I used to run homewares for Woolworths 20 years ago, and then I re-engineered the supply chain for John Lewis. So they were at the time the two leading bedding retailers in the country. So I actually do know a bit about the bedding market, but that's the kind of market opportunity that some people just wouldn't see because they just don't really have kind of empathy for it.
Yeah.
And these two founders have done such a spectacular job with the brand and the product, which comes from an artisan mill in Portugal and beautiful premium bedding. Really great brand. And that's gone from, we invested 20 months ago, $6,000 a month. And last month it did 340 grand in a month. So in 20 months, that's a huge increase. And we're just running through the legals at the moment on a 2 million quid raise at a valuation 10 times that our SCIS investors came in at. And more than 5 times that our EIS investors kind of were behind some follow-on cash because we do SCIS and EIS. We've got a business. This was interesting actually because we really genuinely did not think about this, but we were talking to this business, and there were two founders. One that happens to be of Iranian descent, like an Iranian immigrant woman, and her business partner, another woman, Brazilian descent. And Patricia was pregnant whilst we were kind of talking, and we kind of, I mean, recognized it because it was a big bump, but you know, this is a 5-7 year investment. The fact that somebody is going to have a few months where things are going to be a bit tricky for them is not huge in the scheme of things, but they fed back that it was kind of really unusual. And they just had really good empathy into payments for electronic payments for kids. And because they had kids, or one of them had teenage kids, and it was a real kind of problem in the family, and it's a problem for retailers because it's actually a load of GDPR and contractual stuff that retailers just don't lean into because they haven't got a solution.
Yeah.
And this founding pair were developing a solution. So yeah, so I mean, we have a huge different range of businesses.
Yeah. I think it's good to get a flavour of kind of what companies you're seeing and the type of founders that you're meeting at the same time. So it's good to know that. And just to kind of finish things off, we talked about at the start, we don't have data, we don't have metrics in industry, which makes it difficult to kind of judge how all this works and plays out. What do you think we could do as an industry to just do things a bit better to try and help the diversity issue, to try and help the inclusivity issue?
I think, yeah, I'm a huge believer that if you don't measure something, you don't change it. So I think we have a duty as an industry, as individuals within the industry, but then also when we kind of get together to measure these things. We only started to measure these things because we were just looking at a whole load of data on what we were doing, and we just happened to stumble across this.
Right.
So the fact that we're 40% invested in businesses with female founders and 19 with non-white founders and 65% out of London rather than in London, you know, we stumbled across those, but then we thought, why is that? And kind of worked out that it was a good thing. But we think that everybody should be looking at those measures. And I'd love to see us as an industry end up with a standard set of measures that we all published and were transparent about, because I think that's good for investors. And it also happens to be good for entrepreneurs as well to see.
Yeah, I think it'd be super useful to find out where money's going, who it goes to, and then obviously tracking that money and see how it does and how effective it is in that process. So yeah, I think that's something we could all work towards. Matthew, look, thank you very much. It's been short and sharp. That's pretty much the idea of these videos. So thank you for giving us your insights into the bias in terms of investing and how that works. It's been a really interesting kind of angle to take on investing, and certainly a worthy one. And congratulations again on being Diversity Champion at our ESA Awards. Thank you very much for that. Your open offer is open on our website, so you can find it on there. If people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way of doing that?
So our website is worthcapital.uk, or our fund is found on platforms like Kuba and Growth Invest and Co-Investor, or just give me a call.
Even better still. All right. Thank you very much, Matthew. Take care.
Thank you, Mark.